Welcome back to another episode of the Ag Carbon Podcast from the Agoro Carbon Alliance. I'm your host, Chris Daly. We are live here in Chicago with my friend Tommy. Say hi, Tommy.
How are you doing? Thanks for having me on.
And we are chatting about what he does these days at Agoro. I was talking about stratification. So tell me about your role here, Tommy. What do you do here at Agoro?
Sure. So my official role title is Geospatial Analyst. And basically, what do I do here at Agoro? I work on the data team, and I work in the SOC measurement. So we're using geospatial data to help us in measuring soil carbon accurately, SOC, soil organic carbon. And, the biggest part of my role is using anything relating to remote sensing. So we're talking aerial imagery, we're talking satellite data. What kind of information can we get from that, and how can we relate it to measuring carbon and measuring it more accurately?
Wow, that's truly some fascinating stuff there. Tell me, how'd you get here? What's your educational and academic background?
Sure. So I got my bachelor's in science from Creighton University in good old Omaha, Nebraska, and got to plug Dr. Shawless, my advisor. He introduced me to remote sensing down in the marshes in Georgia, and kind of how we can use that to measure, the thing then was above ground biomass of plants. So we're taking this satellite data, we're going out in the field, and we're trying to correlate what we're measuring with the satellites to what's going on the ground, cutting down this cord grass and, making equations so that we can predict how much vegetation is above ground. Then after I went down to Georgia for grad school, Georgia Southern University, and got my master's, Master of Science degree down there. Kind of doing the same work, working a little more particularly in land classification, which really led me directly to Agoro right after grad school. And land classification is a big step in what we do for soil sampling design.
Okay, well, we hear about land classification a lot in the regen ag space. Why is that important, and why would a carbon project developer be interested in having someone like yourself on?
Sure, it's when we're talking about soil organic carbon, there's obviously a bunch of different factors that affect that. But, one of those factors is knowing the land cover where we're looking at, what's on the ground. Is it a row crop field? What kind of crop is it? What, are there any other practice, information types that need to be taken into account, like tillage, irrigated, things like that, different kinds of grassland. We also need to know the areas that we can't work with, where are the barren areas, where are the, inundated wetlands that we can't use, where's trees at, so we can get rid of those from the project area. And doing the land classification internally is pretty important because, a lot of those publicly available data layers just don't have the accuracy that we can get from doing it ourselves with, our proprietary methods. But it's really important to make sure that when we're predicting SOC and when we're telling the samplers where to go in our growers' fields, that we, get it as accurate as we can, and we provide some, detailed information about what vegetation is on the ground.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. You mentioned the layers that you use. Where are you getting those layers, and who creates those?
Sure. So we use a couple different input layers. A couple of the big ones are the USDA, so the Department of Agriculture. They have the National Agriculture Imagery Program, or the NAIP program. And what we get from them is high resolution aerial imagery. So every 2 years across the entire US, there are airline flights, or not airline flights, but I should say like contracted, plane flights where they just take this high resolution imagery of all these states. And what we get from that is 60 centimeter resolution imagery, which shows us a lot of detail on the ground. Every pixel in an image is 60 centimeters squared. So with that, we can definitely see, individual trees, we can see roads, we can see cars even on the roads, not reading license plates, but seeing some pretty high detail. So that's our main source of imagery to get that high resolution detail. A couple other things, we use the European Space Agency, Sentinel-2 satellites. And with that, we can see more frequently what's going on. We get images every 2 to 5 days. We can see when fields are harvested. We can see when fields are tilled, things like that. Those are probably the two biggest sources of data we use, and they are freely available. So yes, anyone could go out and download those theoretically. The biggest thing is just knowing what software to use to
Mhm.
view those images.
Before we had this conversation, before we started this conversation, Tommy and I made a joke saying like to talk about a job that you couldn't have 20 years ago. And I guess that's not the case, that this technology being used in the regenerative agriculture space that we're talking about right now has been used by farmers and ranchers, people in agricultural extension spaces for quite some time. Can you sort of tell the listeners a little bit about the conversation we had a bit earlier?
Sure, definitely. Yeah, it's one of those things where the technology has really taken off recently, and just in 5 years we have had huge advancements in what we're able to do with this imagery. But going all the way back to 1972, NASA, the U.S. space program, they launched Landsat 1, which is the first Earth observation satellite. And since then, we've really just gotten better at what's being collected. In the NATE program, where the USDA is collecting this aerial imagery, that's been around 25-ish years now. And we can really build on this historical data set and also take into account this new technology that's only been available in recent history, the past 5-10 years.
Wow. Okay. That is a broad history, or broad strokes, how this technology has been used and what folks like yourself in your role have been doing. In your role now at the Agoro Carbon Alliance, take me through a day in the life of Tommy. Like, what do you get up to during the day, and how do you use everything you just share with me? How do you apply it to your role here?
Definitely. We do spend a lot of time just collecting, looking at imagery, and trying to really understand our individual growers' properties. It's hard to, and I get a lot of the skepticism around, how can you understand what's going on in the field without coming to the property all the time? And it's a fair question. It's a tough thing to answer, but what we do is we really analyze all these different imagery sources to try and get a comprehensive picture of what's going on. Now, in a normal day, what do I do? I'm probably downloading some data layers, getting them processed, and then we take them into our software that we use, and we use a Trimble software called eCognition. We also use Esri products, so ArcGIS Pro. They're pretty widely known in the space, I would say. And we're looking at these different growers' properties, and we would be examining, the spectral data or the reflectance of light at different wavelengths. You think of like your high school physics class, and you have everything from gamma rays all the way to microwaves. And in between, there's that little bit that's the visible light spectrum. We're looking at that kind of light, but also like infrared and stuff, and that tells us different things about the ground. We can really pick out barren lands from grassland that's brown with some of those light data layers that we have. So we're looking at that, identifying what's going on the ground, doing some, classification to make sure we're getting the ground cover represented, and then ultimately looking at other soil properties to group them into what we call strata, or areas of homogeneous predicted SOC. So that's kind of, a normal day in the life, just looking at a lot of this imagery, trying to create this strata from the imagery and other data sources to make sure we're representing that carbon in areas that we predict are going to be equal.
So one aspect of your role that I always found to be relaxing as well as curious is you're looking at satellite imagery all day.
Sure.
What are some things that are sort of pleasing for you to look at? What are some things that you get excited? And you grew up in the Midwest. It sounds like you've been down south for graduate school. We're here in the Midwest right now. So what are some things, some features that you enjoy to see in real life, sure, but also behind a screen?
Sure. It's hard to pick any one thing. I will say there's always surprises, right? So looking at some imagery, the other day, I couldn't really tell what was going on the ground. There was like these dark, channels almost of what looked like rock, but it's dark. So it's hard to say if it's like what happened. Was it burned in a forest fire? Like the light signature showing it's barren land, but it's just such a weird pattern. And then I went and talked to one of my coworkers, Austin, and he said that this was actually lava rock from like the volcanic eruption,
Cool.
tens of thousands of years ago. I've never
Uh-huh.
seen anything like it, but there's just always surprises. Another cool thing is, we can pick out like wind turbines if you see them on a grower's property and kind
Uh-huh.
of seeing from the bird's eye view perspective of what's going on with those. It's just kind of fun to see these different things. Uh, One thing too that's really fun, kind of a dynamic, over time fun thing to look at is like a rotational pivot. You
Hmm.
see maybe multiple times within a year, it greens up and is harvested, and greens up and is harvested if it's like hay or something else.
Hmm.
It just, there's always, fun things to see. You just get surprised every day depending on the region that you're looking at.
I can imagine. This is just one heck of a country. I've had the immense privilege of, since joining Agoro, talking to folks from all over the country, visiting parts of the country that I've never seen outside of New England. Um, and as you folks can remember, we had on a couple guys from the Pacific Northwest a couple episodes ago. And I asked them some of their favorite things about the Pacific Northwest. So I'm in your region today. I'm in the Midwest in Illinois. What are some things I can't miss when out in the Midwest, besides Menards and Culver's?
Sure, sure. One thing about the Midwest that always surprises me is the amount of wetlands that are just kind of hidden throughout here. I'm originally from Eastern Iowa,
Hmm.
and you drive through Iowa and these other states, and you see it, you think it's just all corn, right? Well, no, there's actually a lot going on, and there's a surprising amount of wetlands, even
Hmm.
seasonally, but wetlands still here in the Midwest. It just kind of worked into random areas, and you don't really expect to see stuff like that, but
Hmm.
or maybe now I do, but
Yeah, yeah.
most people don't. It's
Hmm.
just it really, no matter where you are, whether it's the Pacific Northwest or the Midwest, there's
Hmm.
always a dynamic landscape, and you can't just assume that it's it's an easily predictable homogeneous area.
Hmm.
There's random spots of detail or interesting features that we try to consider, practically in measuring soil carbon, but also it's just
Hmm.
fun to examine these different
Yeah,
areas.
yeah. Certainly. And that actually brings me to an interesting point. Like one project that you and I have worked on continuously at Agoro, is some of the requirements for stratifying acres and some of the requirements that uh, project developers have working through our using our methodology VM42 as well as the VAR standard of ensuring ineligible lands aren't included. So what are some things that you stratify out of these acres and make sure they aren't enrolled in our program, or make sure we're not getting garnering carbon credits out of these programs? You mentioned wetlands. What are some other areas?
Sure. Right. So think, where can we not help our growers apply certain practices? If there's a lake in the middle of your property, we're probably not going to have you apply practices in the lake. So water features, lakes, wetlands, like I said, rivers, streams, canals, things like that will classify out. Buildings, roads, barren areas, anything that appears really rocky, lava rock too, things like that are obviously barren, and we can't get a soil sample from. If you can't get the metal probe in the ground,
Hmm.
we're not, going to be able to use that land to sequester carbon. Other things, trees, with the methodology that we use, we can't sign up forested areas or trees individually. We need to exclude things like woody biomass. So we pick up trees and we mask them out too.
Hmm.
But those are some of the key features, of what we would call, under the broad umbrella term, ineligible lands.
Gotcha. Gotcha. It is a lot to keep up the integrity of the carbon market and our program in general. Buyers demand credits that take into account different attributes of a land and what makes the U.S. farm and ranch land so special, what need to be protected. So Tommy's role is very, very important, I'll
Well,
say.
I appreciate it.
Tommy, it's been great speaking with you today.
Thanks so much for having me on.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for joining Agoro Carbon Alliance's Ag Carbon podcast. Want to hear more about regenerative agriculture, carbon markets, and more? Head on over to Agoro Carbon Alliance's Knowledge Hub on agorocarbonalliance.com.